So it's a right worth protecting, and it is absolutely not in the plans of authoritarian governments. They don't think you should have guns, period, for no good reason.
What is it going to look like for Canadian firearms owners in 5-10 years?
They don't think anyone should have access to firearms except them. They will be confiscated with no compensation by force. So you can keep everything you have today. Anything in the future is banned. Just use government force on anyone you want, damn the consequences. So not so great.
Hi folks, Canadian Prepper here. Well, we have back once again the Executive Director of the CCFR, Rod Giltaca, and he's here today to talk all about firearms legislation in Canada. I'm hoping that he's going to provide us with a summary of where firearms laws are at in the country, what we can expect moving forward, and all that great stuff. If you guys didn't know, I have a lot of American viewers. Yes, indeed, we can own firearms here. I always have to say that because there's some people who think that we only have slingshots and bows and arrows. And while that might be the case in, I don't know, maybe a few years' time, the way things are going. But Rod, thanks for coming on, man. And maybe you could tell us a little bit about what the CCFR is, the Canadian Coalition for Firearms Rights, and what you do. And give us a rundown of where we're at with this firearms legislation stuff.
So for people that don't know who the CCFR is, we're the largest, most influential firearm lobby group in Canada. We do a lot of things. We have a registered lobbyist right in the nation's capital, which is Ottawa, who is a full-time employee of the group, of the organization that lobbies legislators as much as they'll be lobbied, right? Because gun control is a highly political topic. We do a lot of political action. We are very active in elections. We have a television show that's nationally broadcast on one of our outdoor networks, which is a first in Canada for a gun lobby group. We engage in a lot of stuff, public education, all kinds of things. And basically all of it is aimed to inform the everyday Canadian, the non-gun owning Canadian, why Canadians own guns, because we own a lot of guns. There's a lot of gun owners. Why that right or privilege, no matter how you slice it, is extremely important. And we also beat up against governments that want to end the ability to legally own and use firearms. And we support governments that are supporting us as a community. As far as Bill C21 is concerned, Bill C21 has cleared the House of Commons. So basically, in the legislative process, you have a whole bunch of things in the House of Commons. Once they're done with the bill there, it goes over to the Canadian Senate. They fool around with it for a while, and then they send it back, and it becomes law. So basically, it's made its way to the Senate. We'll see what that process looks like. The Liberals are a censorious, crazy group of people that don't want to allow you to have a debate. They don't want to allow the democratic process to actually happen. So we'll see what kind of shenanigans they pull in the Senate like they pulled in the House.
So just for anybody who's not familiar with Bill C21, we've had the erosion of our firearms privileges in the past 5 years. We've seen more restrictions put on firearms owners. And what was Bill C21 initially, and what were this amendment fiasco? Can you explain that and where we're at with respect to the current amendments and what it means?
So Bill C21 is a typical government bill where they take a couple of provisions that make sense to most people, and then they wrap a bunch of crazy stuff around it so that they can talk about the bill in its entirety. So there's some red flag provisions in there that have to do with domestic violence. I don't think anybody opposes any measure that can have some demonstrable beneficial effect on mitigating domestic violence. But on the other hand, we had originally in the bill a ban on airsoft, just a total destruction of airsoft as a sport in Canada by prohibiting airsoft rifles that look anything like real guns. Then you have the handgun ban. They like to call it a freeze to make it not like a ban, but it's a ban. We get to keep them, but as soon as we pass on, they can't be passed down to the next to your family or anyone. They will be confiscated with no compensation by force by the RCMP or municipal police and destroyed. And then I guess the biggest, most contentious part of this bill was an amendment to ban all centerfire semi-autos and a variety of bolt action and single shot firearms as well. Now the Liberals had withdrawn that bill. There was an incredible amount of pressure put on the government by us and a number of other organizations, wildlife organizations, everyday Canadians, letter writing, public relations stuff. We did a lot of work, and a lot of people did.
There's a lot of pushback from the Indigenous community and even the NDP on that, I do believe.
Well, I don't think we could have done it without the Indigenous. And the NDP, it's funny because they like to credit themselves with all kinds of things. They're very typical politicians, pure politicians, just self-aggrandizing. And, no one did anything but us. That was a very now famous quote by Peter Julian of the NDP. But basically, the Indigenous community, we didn't even talk to them. They did this on their own. They mounted their opposition on their own, and we are incredibly grateful for their voice because it's very powerful in Canada. So everyone pulled together. We got these amendments withdrawn, and then we got new amendments, which have now passed the House and are on their way to the Senate. And those amendments are actually worse than the previous ones.
Okay, so I was of the belief that these amendments weren't so bad, but that shows how much I've kind of fallen off on the issue. So can you explain why these new amendments, what they are, and why they're worse?
So originally, all semi-automatic center fire rifles with detachable magazines basically would have been banned, along with some other criteria which would have banned like a lot of bolt actions and even some shotguns, right? And they also banned by name 22s, a bunch of 22s out there. So this whole weapons of war thing is completely ridiculous. All of those firearms would have been prohibited, and then we would have been waiting for some buyback, or they would have just said, forget it, just turn them in without any compensation. So they came back, that was rejected, and they withdrew those amendments, and they came back with something that is even more insidious, which is, so you can keep everything you have today, but anything in the future is banned. Average observer goes, okay, well, that's not bad. At least I'm not losing anything. And they're like, except we're creating this committee called the Canadian Firearms Advisory Committee. We're going to stack it with anybody that we want, and they're going to tell us which guns they want to ban that exist now, and we will ban them using an order in council like they did back in May 2020. So in fact, it's worse because this committee has no criteria for which to ban. Like they can ban them like the government's already been banning guns, which is like, yeah, it looks scary. You can put a flashlight on that thing. Nobody needs that. And this is a way for them to sidestep any accountability for banning guns. They're like, we had a nonpartisan committee do it. What do you want from us? So it's typical politics. It's typical, I hate to say it, but hard left, alt left politics where, just use government force on anyone you want for any reason, as long as it's politically convenient for you, and, damn the consequences. So not so great.
So this committee, they could just arbitrarily decide to ban the same guns that they were going to in the previous amendment, like gun by gun. And maybe you could talk a bit about what that process might look like and who is going to be on that committee.
Our current completely ridiculous and disgraceful public safety minister, Marco Mendicino, only to be overshadowed, eclipsed by his predecessor, Bill Blair. I mean, these are bad people. So anyway, his latest approach is the committee. He has come out and already said in a statement, it'll be voices from northern communities and rural communities, which nobody knows what those are, gun control experts, law enforcement, people like that, and more. So we don't know if gun owners will have a voice in that. Industry experts, he said, so we don't know what that means anyway, very vague. But everyone that is involved in politics in Canada for any length of time knows governments will stack that committee and they will direct that committee to get the result that they want. And it's only a front in which to, they'll hand them the list, right? The former list from the previous amendments. They'll say, here, start with these. Have a look at these and see if you think these should be banned. And then the committee will say, okay, well, we met and they all should be gone. And the government will say, well, hey, it's not us. It's a nonpartisan, independent committee. So now we have to ban them. So it's just, it's just politics. It's not about public safety.
Once this committee is established and they decide to ban a firearm, does it just immediately become law, or how does that work?
No, they'll present what firearms should be banned to the government. The government has publicly committed that they will, and that was the word that was used, right? And that's the thing. we will ban them using order in council. So for your American viewers, that's like an executive order. So that they will just be like, okay, we got a list from the committee. These are all banned by decree, and that's the end of it. So back in May 2020, there was 1,550 models of firearm, whatever. It was, I mean, there was rocket launchers and all kinds of weird things in there. They weren't all assault weapons. We don't have assault weapons in Canada. But basically, when they banned all those guns, everyone that had like let's say an AR-15, they just have to remain locked up. So over 3 years, and that's it. Like I've lost, whatever. I got $10,000 worth of AR-15s probably, right? And I can't use them. And that's how they're approaching public safety. So they want to do the same thing to the rest of basically all centerfire semi-autos with detachable magazines, or any firearm that is that can produce over 10,000 joules in muzzle energy, or any firearm that has more than a 20 millimeter bore diameter. They've created all these criteria, which bans, I would say, more than half of the guns that exist in Canada right now.
That's insane. So what do you think the true goal of this is? Because I think the CCFR has exposed how a lot of these policies don't really reduce crime. They don't reduce violent crime because a lot of the firearms used in crime are illegal firearms. Of course, that old meme about how the criminals aren't going to give up their guns. What do you think the motivation here? It's hard not to think that it isn't something draconian. It becomes very difficult at a point to say that this is just for the greater good. What do you think the reason for this is? Is it purely political? Is it to win political points? Or is it there's something to the authoritarian nature of these policies?
In the outset, gun control is very complicated. So the Liberals in Canada right now, who are a weakened minority government, they look at gun control as a political winner in urban centers. And that's where their strongholds are. They don't care what the reality is. So there's a political opportunity for them. And at the same time, if you look at the Liberals, the NDP, and the Bloc, these people they're increasingly authoritarian. They don't think anyone should have access to firearms except them, rather than deal with violent crime involving firearms. In fact, the Liberals had Bill C-75 and they had Bill C-5. And both of those bills contributed to the massive increase in violence that we see in Canada right now, because it was like there was bail reform in the wrong way. You could shoot somebody and you'd be out on bail in 2-3 days, only to shoot people again. In fact, we've had situations where people have got out and then shot police officers. They were on bail for violent offenses, to do with firearms. Like it's clown world in Canada right now.
Yeah. So there's been some provincial pushback, and I don't know how much you know about the situation in Alberta and Saskatchewan. If you do, perhaps you could talk a little bit about what some provincial governments are doing to resist these policies.
In the case of Alberta, what they've done is created an Alberta Firearms Act, and they've implemented that. And basically, what the strategy is is, let me step back. When there's opposition, you fight the fight that's in front of you, right? So right now, as long as we possess these now prohibited firearms, we have a chance of getting them back, right? So as long as they're in our possession, if it ever got to the point in Canada where they rolled out a gun buyback, the government spent $2, $3, $4, $5 billion getting all these guns, issuing checks and whatnot. Even if we had the most friendly government that we could ever want, get a majority government, they're not like that. That becomes very politically difficult to say, well, now that we bought all these handguns and all these AR-15s and all these semi-autos and spent billions of dollars, you know what? We're going to open the market back up because it was just the wrong thing to do. Everybody can buy AR-15s again. Like that just wouldn't happen. It's just too, there's no government that wants to be a one-term government in order to please 2 million gun owners out of 38 million Canadians. And possession is important, right? If you need that gun for whatever reason, it's good for it to be in your possession. And then, so I think Alberta in particular thought, well, how can we disrupt the ability for the government to actually come and get those guns? So what they did was they put in a law that said any confiscation agent, and they defined what a confiscation agent would be, which would be municipal or federal police running a buyback, has to be licensed by the province to carry out those activities. And it's up to the province's discretion whether or not they license anyone. So they're in a position to say, well, yeah, we're not handing out licenses right now, or the backlog's a few years. it allows them to play the same game that the federal government is playing with millions of Canadians.
So they can potentially delay it for an extended period of time. But ultimately, wouldn't the federal government have the power to override those? Isn't that where we might potentially see conflict, if you will, or I don't know, maybe for lack of better words, between federal law enforcement and provincial or municipal?
Well, there would be probably a big lawsuit, right? There'd be a challenge to the jurisdiction of the federal government versus the jurisdiction of the provincial government, and that those things can take years, right?
So just more time that it buys, basically.
Yeah, like at the end of the day, this whole thing is such a completely offensive waste of time and resources and stress, and pushing stress down on Canadians for no good reason. If you have a public safety problem, solve your public safety problem. Keep violent offenders in jail. Deal with your raging fentanyl and opioid crisis that's going on in Canada, causing people to die every day, like multiple people dying every single day. For the casual observer, it's very difficult to get into all these issues. There's so many other things going on, right, in the world. And a human being only has so much attention to go around. So when people say things like more guns equal more death, that makes sense to people. When they say, well, nobody needs an AR-15, if you've never even seen an AR-15, you're like, that makes sense to me, right? So it's a really difficult fight, and it's a fight worth fighting.
Do you know anything about the Saskatchewan policy towards this? Is it similar to Alberta, or is there differences?
It might be. I don't think theirs has become law yet, if I'm not mistaken. So I don't want to comment on it unless I really know, because when it comes to a lot of mainstream media sources and certainly politicians, they don't care what's true or what's not. They just look to manipulate people and fool them. Over on where I exist, I have to be 100% factual and correct in everything I say, because one slip up and I lose credibility, because we're under fire all the time. So that's why I won't comment on that, because I haven't really looked at it. So, but yeah, I'm sure it's something, I would imagine it's something very similar to what Alberta is doing.
Well, that's why we like you representing us, is because you're strictly about the facts and you do a great job with what you do. And I'm not sure, I think I don't want to, we don't want to take all the credit for, what happened recently and getting those amendments rolled back. I know it was all the NDP, but I'm sure that you guys had something to do with that, because the CCFR really rallied, and I think that your organization is making a difference, and I would encourage people to support, get a membership. How much is it?
$40 a year. You end up with $5 million of liability insurance as well for outdoor activities, and that money goes to the CCFR to continue to do programs like we did the Scrap C21 program. If your viewers want to go to scrapc21.ca, that was a campaign that we recently did to get those amendments withdrawn, which worked. But again, it wasn't all us. It was the Aboriginal community. It was individual gun owners. It was wildlife organizations, everybody pulling together. But I'd like to think that we played an influential role. So you can decide for yourself, go to that website and just look at the things that we did. And I'd like to think that it made a difference.
Yeah, and I think what I like about your organization is that it's less polarizing than some more radical groups that are equivalent. And even though we might have beliefs that align with those groups, you have to play the game, as it's played, and play by the rules type thing. Otherwise, you're just, potentially making the problem worse by getting those people who you need to be on your side, by pushing them away. And I think you guys are good at being a bit more, working within the system, knowing how to work within the system to get these changes made. What do you see, like, if you were to realistically look into the future, if we don't get a change in government, what is it going to look like for Canadian firearms owners in 5-10 years?
Well, the idea is to get basically any firearm, other than maybe a hinge or break action, single shot firearm, out of the hands of Canadians. It should be out of reach. They love the UK, they love Australia. They want to beat them. They love New Zealand. They want to actually be more restrictive than those countries. And firearm ownership is incredibly important because firearms are unique property, unlike any other property that you could ever own, right? You can sport shoot, you can hunt, you can recreational shoot, you can protect your life. They don't think you should have guns, period. And this is an incredibly important right or privilege, depending on the way that you want to spin it, and it needs to be protected. So we need to get these people out, and we got to keep fighting.
Are some of these laws, legislations able to be repealed, and what would that process look like? Because it's looking likely that this one will pass the Senate.
It will pass the Senate because the NDP are voting in lockstep with the Liberals, so are the Bloc Québécois. So the three of them are a large majority of the House, that's what you need to pass law. So this will pass. They have the votes. The only factors involved in this equation are if the Canadian government, if there's an election and these people lose and the Conservative government were to win, even a minority government, they can mitigate a lot of this stuff. A lot of it will just go away. Not all of it, but a lot of it will. Or the Canadian government prorogues, which means you put a pause in the political operations of the government. Now, prorogation has happened quite a few times. It's a tool that they have. But traditionally, if a government prorogues, all of the bills on the order paper, all the bills that are making its way through the legislative process, they die on the order paper. They have to be reintroduced from the beginning of the process. But now that's common knowledge in political circles, but we did some research and we found that there are some ways the government can bring a bill back at its current state. So there's a lot of moving parts here. A lot of people are like, well, the political process is hopelessly corrupt. They're right. That is a fact. I can tell you because I'm involved in it constantly. Working the political process is incredibly important. And it can't be ignored. Will it stop them entirely? No. We need to be active and get them out as a government, get a friendly government in, and then work with them to make the changes that we want. It's important for people to understand what's at stake in the different levels of this fight and why it's worth fighting.
Yeah, and I got to say again, you guys need to go and support the CCFR, man, because it's $40. I know right now times are tough financially for a lot of people, but I mean, I just took my daughter to Dairy Queen the other day and it cost $35, for one fast food outing. And for a person who has, even if you only got $1,000 worth of guns that you're trying to preserve, I mean, that's one of the best investments a person can make at this point in time, because it's one thing to have a group that is just talking and, speaking ideologically. It's another to have a group who's able to actually get in there and know all the nuts and bolts of the system and be able to maneuver that environment and beat them at their own game, so to speak. So that's why you guys got to go support the CCFR. And, even if you're American, hell, get a membership. Can Americans get a membership?
Yeah, anyone can get a membership. Yeah.
Okay, well, so, people, I think, are aware of how insidious and incremental these things are. And, for my American viewers, that if we go down, it's just all the more pressure to bring some states, states are going to use that as a reference tool and as a guideline to follow for them. California will probably do something similar because we seem to sort of be very similar in our laws. One thing I am noticing, and I think one point of optimism, is that it seems, and maybe I have a bit of a, what is it called, like a confirmation bias, but I think I'm starting to see people warm to the idea of firearms a bit more who previously weren't. Are you noticing that perhaps people across the political aisle are warming to the idea of owning firearms?
Well, we have new firearm owners happening all the time, right? And we have, as an organization, we created National Range Day. And basically that's the first Saturday in June forever is National Range Day. And so in our very first year, which was last year, we had over 100 open house events at ranges across the country, over 100 of them in our first year. And those range events can have anywhere from 100 to 600 people moving through there, and many of those people never fired a gun before. Because I think if you're a gun owner, you remember, it's like, well, I remember the first time I fired a gun and I was like, oh man, because that's how it worked for me. I'm like, oh, I think I need a gun too. This is awesome, right? And as you kind of make your way through your firearms owning journey, you're like, oh, this is so important on so many levels. You start to understand it more. So one of the most important political strategies that we can deploy is take somebody shooting so that they understand, they become resilient to I'll say it, like the propaganda, the brainwashing that the media and the government, certainly in Canada and certainly in the United States too, the current government, are trying to make people think that the reason why there's multiple victim public shootings, the reason why there's firearm-related violence, the reason why there's gang violence is because you have, at least in Canada, licensed gun owners that go through mandatory safety training, get a criminal record check every day for the rest of their lives, have storage laws that are criminal offenses if you contravene them, transportation laws, handling laws, registration of handguns, registration of certain long guns, like all that stuff. Like, these are not the people that are engaged in violence, you know? So anyway, it's if we can have everyday non-gun owning Canadians just realize only this, that this topic is a little bit more complex than it's being made out to be. If we can achieve that, then the political advantage to Liberals and Bloc and NDP, that just starts to evaporate. It starts to erode. And they're like, you know what? We're just going to back off on gun control. We'll still have an ideological position on it, but we're not going to push it so hard because, you know what? It's very divisive, and I'm not sure we're getting more votes than we're losing. Like, this is the only thing that these people understand. And that's why changing the minds of everyday people so that when they go to the ballot box, they're like, I don't know, these people lied a lot on that gun control thing. They're not concerned with public safety. You know, it starts lending itself to the conversation about public safety and a bit of a betrayal when they figure out what these people are really doing. That's how we change the system on the legal front, right? So this is the fight that's in front of us right now.
I really like what you said. A practical solution for everybody is just to bring somebody shooting who might not have been. And because we do a lot of video shoots here, you know, I have the pleasure of being able to bring people out who haven't shot before, like the communist camera crew, who you've probably seen moving around in the back there. A lot of them haven't, that's our nickname for them, but I actually convinced the communist cameraman, the original communist cameraman, to get a firearms license. So he went and he took the test, and he's got his license now, and he's probably going to go and buy himself a shotgun because that's what Joe Biden told him to get. And but it's a step, you know, in that direction, right? Yeah, I had a couple other people here out shooting the other day, and you know, just demystifying the whole thing. And it's a if anything, it's good to just have done that before, you know, just so you can say, yeah, I've shot a gun before, you know, like that's a familiar, you know, it's not as scary then, and you realize that the people you're doing it with aren't scary and less alienating. And that's what all I'd encourage people to do, is try to be more inclusive in the process, and hopefully we can turn the tide here. It's not inevitable, but you know, we have to actually do the work. And I think one of the most practical things people can do is simply go get a membership. It doesn't end there, but you know, that's a start, and that's going to give you guys the resources that you need to just do more on this issue. The more, you know, followers you have, and go check out their YouTube channel too, guys. They give you up-to-date information on all this stuff. And you do podcasts quite frequently that you put on there as well, right?
That's correct, Dan. The CCFR Radio podcast, and that's on our YouTube channel, CCFR channel. Just search for that and you'll find it. And then, of course, as I mentioned, we have the very first in Canadian history nationally broadcast television show, CCFR Radio on the Air on Wild TV. But yeah, there's a lot of ways to stay up to date, and there's a lot of outreach and projects that we do, like the things that we just mentioned, to bring the community together to let people know what's going on and how they can help, how they can resist it.
Guys, go check out CCFR's YouTube channel. I'll post a link in the description and the pinned comment. And thanks a lot for coming out, Rod.
Thanks, Nate. I appreciate it.
All right, take care.
The best way to support this channel is to support yourself by gearing up at CanadianPreparedness.com, where you'll find high-quality survival gear at the best prices, no junk, and no gimmicks. Use discount code PREPPINGGEAR for 10% off. Don't forget, the strong survive, but the prepared thrive. Stay safe.